Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in just another minute or two to let folks join us. Thanks so much for being here today. All right. I see lots of people joining us, which is awesome. Thanks so much for joining us today, everyone. My name is Shanti Matthew, and I'm the Managing Director of the Public Policy Lab. We're so glad to have so many guests here today. Um, Please, if you would like to introduce yourself, throw a little note in the chat to let us know where you're coming from today. Perhaps let us know if you're in rainy New York City and how you're beating the rain today, or tell us the weather wherever you are. But we're so glad to have you. Um, Today's conversation is part of a series that we are calling PPL15. This is a celebration of the Public Policy Lab's 15th anniversary. Each month, we are releasing a blog post and as well as hosting an associated conversation focused on one of the lessons that we have learned in the past 15 years of doing public sector innovation work. Today's conversation is going to be focused on trust and the human connection, really about why good tools and good information are not enough when it comes to making change in systems. So, before we dive in, a quick note on participation. We would love your questions today to include your questions in the conversation. There is a Q&A box down at the bottom of your Zoom webinar toolbar. And we would love for you to submit your questions through that Q&A box. You absolutely do not need to wait until the end. Feel free to add your questions as they come up. And we will do our best to reserve some time to get to as many of your questions as we can. So, with that, let me introduce our speakers, our panelists for the day. Today, we are joined by Yasmin Fodil, Emily Osgood, and Andrew Eickmann, who are all leaders who have spent years attempting to improve and serve communities through public services. Each one of them was involved in the Public and Collaborative Project, which is the backdrop of this month's blog post. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. But let me give you a deeper dive into who these folks are. So, Yasmin is the Chief Operating Officer at Code for America, where she oversees the programs, impact, and strategic operations required to unlock benefits that advance economic mobility at scale. Yasmin came to Code for America with 2 decades of experience leading strategy, impact operations, and program design across nonprofit, philanthropic, and government sectors. She has a bachelor's degree in government from Cornell and a master's in public policy from Harvard University. And I learned today that she is a self-proclaimed, her words not mine, reality TV fanatic, which I feel like we could spend the whole hour talking about. So welcome, Yasmin. Thanks for being here. Next up, we have Emily Osgood. Emily is Associate Commissioner for Housing Opportunity and Placement Services at the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. She currently oversees the Housing Connect Affordable Housing Lottery, housing ambassadors programs, homeless referrals into affordable housing, and the operations of HPD's rental subsidy programs like Section 8. And altogether, those programs help secure affordable housing for tens of thousands of New Yorkers each and every year. Emily has a Master's of Urban Planning from NYU Wagner and an undergraduate degree from also Harvard University. She grew up, we were talking about this just a few minutes ago. Emily grew up in Vermont and loves winter. Another thing which I feel like we could spend an hour talking about, like how does one embrace the winter? Really enjoy it. So thank you, Emily, for being here. And then my colleague, Andrew Eickmann, last but certainly not least. Andrew is a researcher, a strategist, and a team leader with expertise in urban planning and affordable housing. Since 2010, Andrew has worked in both New York City and Portland, Oregon to help teams inside city government evaluate and improve public services and policies. He is my dear colleague at the Public Policy Lab, and here he leads projects and helps to guide policy analysis across our organization. Andrew holds a Master's of Urban Studies degree from Portland State University with an emphasis on policy research and analysis. And Andrew on the weekends apparently can be found playing soccer and or piloting a cargo bike around town, which I have questions about, with his two adorable sons aboard. So those are our illustrious panelists for the day. And with that, I am going to hand things over to Andrew to take us from here. So, Andrew, over to you.
Thank you so much for that intro, Shanti. I will not talk about cargo biking, but any other time, I'm open for questions. Um, I want to set the stage here today with just a little visual refresher, because we are talking about work that is over a decade in our past, and I feel like we could all stand to look at some of the things that we created in that project together, and also orient our audience to that work. So, as Shanti mentioned, the project that we're referencing today was called Public and Collaborative. And this was a really unique partnership that brought together HPD, the city's affordable housing agency, which Emily represents today, plus the Parsons Desis Lab at the new school, plus a new civic design organization at that time called Public Policy Lab, or PPL, which was really just a startup in the early 2010s. Um, our focus was the really notoriously complex affordable housing application and lottery. And this is the process through which HPD allocates affordable housing to qualified tenants in New York. It was, suffice to say, not an easy process at that time. Here is poor Stanley, an avatar, longtime New Yorker, first time applicant, struggling to make sense of the application for housing. In the early 2010s, though, HPD was really aware of this challenge and was actively working to fix some of the age-old challenges and hurdles with the lottery process, including by launching what was then a new web-based application portal, NYC Housing Connect, which Emily can tell us all about. Still very much active today in the way that New Yorkers find access to housing. So at this time, PPL and Parsons came along with a mission to design a series of pilots that would ultimately improve the experience of the affordable housing application for New Yorkers, and also extend the reach of the city's affordable housing program to a greater number of residents. And when we started this project with research by speaking with potential applicants, we found that many New Yorkers didn't understand really the basics of affordable housing, what that term meant, how it differed from public housing or NYCHA housing, who this housing was really meant for, or how to get an application. And folks certainly didn't understand, generally speaking, how to get ready for the interview stage and for success in the lottery and placement process. So as one of the pilots that the PPL fellows designed, we created a suite of informational tools that were designed to answer all of those fundamental questions and guide applicants through the journey. So here on the screen, we have just a sort of a cross-section of a few examples of those informational tools. A monthly poster showing affordable housing coming to a neighborhood near you, a process map for the application, kind of diagramming the journey from the perspective of the applicant and letting folks know what to expect, and an after you apply guide that would help people get ready for the interview phase. And these materials, it has to be said, did a really amazing job at their mission. The materials looked great. They absolutely met a real need, and were downloaded hundreds of thousands of times just during the pilot itself. However, PPL also knew that just flooding the market with more information wouldn't be enough, that the agency needed new approaches when it came to distributing these materials and really engaging applicants. So that is where a separate pilot called the Housing Ambassadors came in. And the concept behind this pilot was simple. It was to reach the hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers eligible for housing. PPL proposed that HPD should partner with trusted CBOs, community-based organizations, that already knew housing and knew city services, and more importantly, organizations that knew their communities. So many of these orgs were actively providing other forms of housing assistance, financial empowerment services, benefits navigation, you name it. So in the pilot, HPD and PPL identified four nonprofits working in neighborhoods around New York City and invited them into HPD and provided some training to staff to assist clients with the housing application and lottery process in what was really sort of a semi-official capacity. So then with HPD's backing and informational materials, those orgs could act as a bridge to the community. So you see here a quote from one of the ambassador organizations describing what they do, which ends with a point about providing information. But I think it's important to say that the ambassadors were providing more than customer support or technical assistance. Excuse me. They were really providing trust. And that's the theme that we're going to focus on during our conversation today. Um, so I will pause now and shut this down one moment so that we can turn to our panelists. And I want to start just by asking what each of you recall about that project. Yasmin, do you remember a moment when it became clear that the informational materials alone wouldn't address the central challenge of this work?
Um, I do. I think, one of the things that was well, first of all, I should say this project was over a decade ago, but it still remains like one of the highlights of my career. And the reason for that is just the boldness with which our team, including our HPD partners, all of us here on the call, like how bold and creative the thinking was. Because with the goals that you mentioned, Andrew, HPD, like our HPD partners were willing to meet people where they were and do things really differently, which was very, very rare. I think it remains rare, but it was definitely rare at the time. And one of the practices that we used in talking to people, we just like went out on the street and we walked up to people and we talked with them. And I remember one day being out in, I think it was Brownsville in New York City, and had a table and we're talking to people. And there was so much skepticism. Like people didn't want to talk to us because they, thought as representatives of the city, which we weren't actually. Like I was a PPL fellow. There's just a lot of skepticism and a lot of fear, and a lot of like, not, I've been there, done that, not going to do it again. And so I think that was a real light bulb moment around like, oh, this is not just about clarity of information. Of course, that's the foundation. That's like table stakes. But really interacting with people in kind of informal settings and understanding like the gut reaction, I think was clear that we were going to have to do something different to meet people where they were emotionally.
Yeah, thank you for that. Um, I will say that that experience as an HPD employee of getting out and speaking with residents and hearing some of those fundamental questions and doubts firsthand was really one of the most remarkable parts of this project for me as well. So Emily, you were also at HPD at that time, and ultimately really helping the ambassador's pilot land and take root within the agency. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the internal dynamics at HPD during the ambassador's pilot, and maybe some of the concerns or challenges in those early days, and what helped to overcome them.
Sure. Uh, it was being at a housing agency, being at this housing agency in New York City, it was kind of it felt like a transformational moment in the perspective, at least of the teams working on the housing lottery applications to housing, because uh, we, as an agency overall, were kind of focused on buildings and units, right? People were obviously who we serve, and taxpayers fund a large part of the investment that we make in the buildings and the systems and the tools that we have for getting people into housing. But we were pretty early on, I think, in changing how we talked and thought about who we serve, or what HPD's kind of central focus was, talking about in terms of people, talking about in terms of user friendliness, service journeys, experience design. These were back in 2012, really new phrases to a lot of people, and met internally with skepticism. We had a lot of conversations about when the project overall, with the Public Policy Lab fellows and the materials, prep materials we were creating, whether we could use the term research. And we settled on design research, right? Because we needed to be clear that there are different types of research. There's academic research and empirical research, and there's design research. So there's a lot of getting internally people used to the approach of human-centered design and what to do with the information that we get from humans. Not to make us sound like robots, it was very exciting, I would say, and rewarding for us too. I think a lot of people come to government, or a lot of people come to HPD because they really care about serving people, and this project and what it has produced through the Housing Ambassadors Program and many other things have allowed a lot of public, young or old public servants to get excited and connected to people. But it was a process of getting everybody on board. I think when it came to bringing the housing ambassador organizations, the people working in community housing organizations, or local kind of benefit centers, retail storefronts in communities, helping with a variety of services, when it came to bringing them into HPD and making them ambassadors but training them and listing them on our website as ambassadors of the housing lottery process, the housing application process. We, as bureaucrats, were immediately like, well, is there a contract? We immediately started thinking about what the liability of having somebody who isn't paid by the city of New York say something about what the city of New York offers as a service. And we wanted to create a logo at one point. We did, for the housing ambassadors, but even a couple of years in, what did having a logo mean? Was it giving a stamp of approval to somebody who was a partner? But what does it mean to be a partner? So we were skeptical too, right? People were skeptical of us. We were skeptical of everyone, in that we wanted to be, as the city, really hyper responsible and accurate in the information we're providing. And engaging a variety of different partners, not always on a contracted basis, who are speaking different languages, working in a variety of communities and geographies, meant we had to let go of some of that. Be here for if there was confusion, but acknowledge that the relationship between the city and the organizations was going to have to be what we relied on to get information out, rather than just relying on ourselves and what we can publish in writing.
I think on that theme of sort of loosening up the reins of control, the battle I remember from that early pilot period, or maybe pre-pilot, was conversations around a Google group. The idea that the ambassadors, the community-based organizations participating in the pilot, ought to have a forum for communication and sharing of best practices among themselves. And that would be lightly monitored or not monitored at all by HPD, by the agency. And I think that question really brought forward this issue of control and what it meant to ask these agencies or organizations to participate and to act as this bridge to the community, but without direct oversight from HPD. So I had forgotten, though, Emily, about the battles around the question of a logo, but I do vaguely recall that now. Um, Yasmin, any thing that stands out to you when thinking back to the early design or pilot phase of the ambassadors program and challenges we had to overcome?
I mean, honestly, I want to make this like very clear that Andrew and Emily and other core stakeholders at HPD, this was crazy. I mean, this is like not normal what we proposed. And I like the thing that stands out to me was just like shock that the city was gonna do it and that you two are pushing that forward. So service design, I really believe, is magical. It makes the invisible visible. And so what we were able to do was make visible all of the different ways that New Yorkers navigate getting access to housing. And a major part of that ecosystem was these CBOs and these informal networks. I mean, there's so much value in those informal networks, and there's also a lot of risk if the city is saying that we are blessing this informal network and they're going to share information, and that it's consequential stakes for people. And yet it's real, whether it is real. And so for HPD to kind of acknowledge this ecosystem, understand the trust between these informal CBOs and residents, and to think about how they could act as a platform and a lever to help people get access to information through trusted resources. I mean, that was really different. And so what I remember is like lots of meetings and lots of lawyers, lots of but you really made it happen. And figured out how to absorb the risk in a way that was responsible too, because you have authority. I mean, there's like real consequences and real accountability. And um, I just think it's not to be underestimated, like how much you had to really contemplate to be able to acknowledge the invisible ways that New Yorkers are navigating essential public services.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that shout out to that work in the past of getting this work off the ground and started. I want to come back in a moment, Emily, to the kind of present view of how the program has evolved since that time. But maybe before we go there, I want to poke at one of the arguments that we've made in the blog post associated with this panel, where we say that as the title says, good tools are not enough. And that in the case of this program, New Yorkers really needed not just better informational materials, but really the help from the ambassadors, the human layer to fully trust and access the housing lottery. But Yasmin, I want to ask you to help push back on that argument for a second. In your work with Code for America, you're fundamentally in the business of making government work better through improved technology, through improved information systems. So when can a well-designed system do the job of improving service delivery alone without needing that human layer of establishing trust?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that I would call out. And I think it's actually rare, but I think it is possible. So I think one is when the policy itself is simple and easy to access. So a lot of the friction in government services in housing, in Medicaid, in SNAP, in all of these, really consequential services comes from complicated eligibility rules. It comes from complex verification processes to make sure that, the information people are sharing is accurate. And it comes from when, there's frankly government isn't trusting of what people are doing or saying, right? So like if the rules are complex, technology can only smooth over so much. So when the policy is simple, technology itself can be, a standalone solution. I think the other thing is that the system is predictable and fair. So if there are, simple policy with clear roles that are kind of black and white, where there's not a lot of gray area, and where people really understand and believe that the rules will be applied consistently. I think then, technology on its own probably possible. I think the third is when there's like real accountability behind the system. And, we're seeing that more and more with AI, like people, want to know who built this, like what data is it using, who's responsible if it makes a mistake. So like the AI is kind of bringing new questions around when and how folks trust technology. Um, so I think there are a good number of situations where technology can be applied without like a human layer. But humans are really essential when people are navigating high stakes, unfamiliar systems, things that really affect like the core things that people need in life, housing, cash, healthcare. Um, we recently did a project in Los Angeles in the wake of the wildfires, and technology and information is really important, but people wanted to go in person to the centers to like talk to caseworkers face to face, and one can understand that, right? Um, and so I think it's really about understanding like what role does technology play, and when do you need people? The products that we run, we have a product to support people accessing SNAP in California. So it's food assistance, low-income folks who are trying to access tax credits. We have a client success team. These are real people who are manning a chat. We use as much AI and automation as possible to make sure that our client success staff can focus on the highest impact cases. But even at Code for America, like we have humans that help people use the technology, and that's a really important part of the equation.
Yeah, Yasmin, that really makes me think about how in current projects at PPL, where we're often out speaking with applicants, residents, benefit recipients, about their preferences, what they prefer to use when it comes to interacting with government agencies. Really consistently, folks talk about wanting to pack up and go to an office and speak to somebody across a desk. And that then has bearing on those projects where agencies are really doing their best to bring materials and services online as well they should. And sometimes that can mean that there's a rush to abandon or really retire the in-person or the sort of analog channel, paper-based channels of communications. And I think more and more we're advising to go slow on that, right? To go slow on retiring those experiences, because it's not just tech averse folks or older populations, or maybe some of the stereotypes we have about people who prefer to go in person. It's really people of all walks of life want to know that they can go in and talk to somebody directly about these services, which are so crucial to the livelihood and quality of life of so many Americans.
A lot of what we are working on now is also making it more efficient for those folks to do their job. So, we are AI tools, for example, that can help classify documents that folks are submitting or summarize documents that folks are submitting. So, what are the ways to make it easier and faster for people to be able to help, like for caseworkers and ambassadors to help folks. So it's really about like increasing access, making things more seamless. But I don't think, if you think about the products and services we use in our own everyday lives, like you still want to be able to call someone if you have a problem. So I think that the same is true for government technology and services.
Yeah, absolutely. So Emily, I want to turn to you and, as I said, come back to sort of the present day, and ways that the program has evolved, the ambassadors program has evolved over time. Um, and in doing so, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about the ambassadors and what they mean to residents, and the clients that they serve. So, love to hear from you about the way the program has grown and changed, and also what do you hear from residents about what ambassadors mean to them?
The the network of housing ambassador organizations has grown from 4, I think, when we piloted it in 2014, very tentatively, to right now it's at close to 50. There have been times when it's been up to 60 organizations. And the the relationships that we've built, first the government to those community-based organizations, has been invaluable and continues to sort of appear in my life, and I think in a lot of our HPD work every day, because I could not have estimated how valuable the feedback coming from the ambassadors, coming from what the ambassadors are hearing and learning from residents, would be for the city. And so one way, in addition to growing and serving a lot of people, one way in which the program has been transformative and kind of lives on today, even bigger than it started, in scope, is that we use the ambassadors as sounding boards for all kinds of new technology, new ideas, feedback sessions. We're thinking about changing a policy. We need a quote for an article. There are go-to people. We have a relationship, a partnership, and a mutual trust with them, and we really rely on them. So we learn from them. They rely on us for information and access and materials, and hopefully some of the trust that hopefully they're able to convey trust in government to residents who might not feel so trustworthy coming directly to us, or trusting coming directly to us. But the feedback loop, just the generative power of those relationships between the city and ambassadors has been awesome and continues to be. And like, side note, I just came from a meeting of a membership organization of affordable housing developers and community organizations, and many of the people who were brand new ambassadors earlier in their career, getting started, 10 years ago, when I was a lot younger, they were a lot younger. Now they're leading organizations, they're leading affordable housing firms, or and we're all kind of bringing this resident focused perspective up together, and sharing it out across the industry, which is cool. The residents themselves, tenants, applicants, I think, Yasmin, you made the point that especially when something's complicated, or maybe especially when there's a problem, having a human to go to is really key. There's no replacement for it. And I think that is where I see or hear about most of the stories of where tenants and applicants, housing seekers, New Yorkers rely on ambassadors. People who, if Andrew, you said, technology and human interaction aren't exclusively for a younger or an older or a more digitally or less digitally savvy set. But we do honestly hear from people who go to their housing ambassador, their local organization all the time to check their email, because their email is where they will find out if they got selected for housing lottery, and where they will access the internet and submit documents. They'll get technical help from a person to understand the process, but they also just rely on the tools and resources and knowledge of the staff at an organization in their community, and come to trust them. I not long ago was talking to some folks who had created their own housing advocacy organization, working closely with one of our ambassadors in the Bronx. And a woman was like, I'm down here all the time. I basically live here. I do my photocopying here. I do my Housing Connect applications here. These are the people that I depend on for so many of the services in my life. And we see and hear that same kind of the value that's sort of integrated across throughout people's lives, in terms of language access and people new to New York City go to an organization to help them find an initial home, find a job. Those organizations are also housing ambassadors. Those folks can form a bond, form a community, and find out how to apply to housing and trust that they've got the information they need to navigate the processes that are available. So it's bigger than just the service. I think the one service that we provide, or the one tool that we provide, with the ambassadors, the community-based organizations, they're like foundational in a lot of people's lives, in their communities, in their experience in New York. And housing is a major piece of that, but not the only one.
Yeah. To me, Emily, that just highlights what an incredible resource in both directions to tap into these community-based organizations are for residents and for the city, which of course was the original concept. But I think the richness of that resource was, we knew it was a good idea, but to hear you speak just about how central these organizations are to the lives of New Yorkers and the clients that HPD works to serve just brings that home, that it's such a fantastic bridge between residents and the agency. I want to actually kind of come back to a topic that Yasmin sort of touched on earlier, and that is the question of AI. This being 2026, we should not go without talking about the importance of AI and the limits of AI. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm right now about how AI-powered tools will revolutionize government services, and ultimately transform how residents navigate their government. Housing applications, public benefits, tax returns, you name it. But given everything we've discussed about the value of human connection and trust, I want to get your take on that promise. And I guess my question is, what would it take to convince you that an AI system could ultimately be trusted to replace the role of housing ambassadors? Yasmin, do you have thoughts on this one?
What would it take to trust that AI systems can replace the role of housing ambassadors? I don't know that we want to replace the role of housing ambassadors with AI. I think that we want to make the job of the housing ambassador easier and I think AI can help with that. I think we want to use AI to help residents. Like there's such a liberation of information through AI. And I think that the more information people can access on their own, the better equipped they are to have powerful interactions with housing ambassadors. But I don't think we necessarily want to replace housing ambassadors with AI. And I don't know that, like, do you want to replace your doctor with AI? Maybe there's like some things you want to like get information about, but so I think I see it more as supplementing and enhancing more than replacing. I guess I'll say if applying, okay, I'm going to push myself. If there were unlimited housing resources and all anyone had to do to access those resources was to send in a very short not even application, request form, and that was all it took, then I think you could use AI to accomplish that and probably not have housing ambassadors. But until we have unlimited housing stock and there's enough housing for everyone who needs it, probably you're going to need some humans.
Yeah. So back to your earlier points about complexity. Once the complexity can be edited out of the system, right, or all that sort of friction can be removed. Um, Emily, do you have a take on this? How do you think about the role of AI in serving clients and how that relates to the role that the ambassadors play?
I think, well, if we had unlimited or even just sufficient housing resources, then we wouldn't even have a housing lottery, right? We wouldn't have to select among, there wouldn't be more people needing it than we had units to provide, and we wouldn't have to. So, yes, let's reach for that and expand supply and do that great work. But in the meantime, knowing that that is a big reach we haven't cracked the code on yet, at least not in this city. I think Yasmin, you hit the nail on the head when it comes to being able to provide tools to help housing ambassadors. I would say my staff too at HPD. We want people to be able to spend their time, people, whether they're looking for housing, whether they're working for the housing department, whether they're in a community-based organization, to be able to spend their time focusing on the stuff that really deserves their time. So for my team here, that might mean like sorting through a really complicated application, or someone got rejected or missed a deadline, or that something happened with our technology. There's something that really needs to be investigated and warrants the time, warrants 45 minutes on the phone being like, and then what happened? And is this a problem? And how can I help? And not the, and spend less time on something that an answer to a common issue that maybe AI could adapt and help with if we have a good knowledge base and we can just sort of consistently and clearly help people solve the easier problems quickly and focus on the tricky ones. That goes for, I think, yes, from people looking for housing, people working on helping people look for housing, providing housing, and government too. That's where we would find, I think, the big value. But I don't think that that there's a replacement in like in an information form, kind of back to your central point, Andrew, for a trusted organization, a trusted human, a trusted neighbor. I mean, to get to help people when the service, the need is so consequential, like finding an apartment or a home.
Yeah. I think this issue of housing supply that you're both touching on is one that we grappled with in this project, that as much as we could make it clearer how New Yorkers could prepare for the lottery process, it is still a lottery, and we know that there are not enough affordable units for the number of New Yorkers who qualify based on income. So that supply challenge is not something we could solve through service design. And it's not something that the ambassadors can solve either. But as I was writing the blog piece, I thought a lot about how what the ambassadors do provide is in an environment where not every applicant is successful, they're able to help people process that frustration and disappointment, and build the sort of courage to try it another time and apply for another unit or find other resources that might meet the need of that individual or family. And in that way, it really is much beyond information provision. It's sort of acting as counselor and guide to a really complex system. And those are functions that do feel inherently human, I think. Um, Thank you. I want to ask one closing question before we go to audience Q&A. And that is just to think back to your 2012 selves at the start of this project. If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice at the beginning of the project, what would that be? And why don't we start with you, Emily?
I think it would be that in government and service provision, especially just I think in government in general, things are always changing. So build into the tools and the programs and the plans you're creating the expectation that it's going to need to be updated or replaced or adapted. So we created beautiful informational materials, and 1 year later, some other organization came in and said, we want to fix the housing lottery through organizational materials. I'm like, we've got them already. And then they're like, okay, 3 years later, we want to fix now something has changed. Let's update them. Where's the file? I mean, from very logistic, who has the file? Did we do it in InDesign? Okay, we should do it in PowerPoint. I mean, I'm, aging myself a bit, but like, how can we actually set ourselves up to make it easier for when I'm still here, but like, the next people or the team that works on the Housing Ambassadors program here now, like they need to be able to adapt the information to get new things translated, to make new tools, convey new trainings, new information all the time. Sometimes because information is changing, sometimes because we have a new mayoral administration or a federal political landscape that we need to try to communicate. And so the more flexible we can be, honestly, with our tools, our content, our materials, the more people that can update them and the faster we can kind of get them out the door through many channels, the easier it's going to be to keep up and serve people on the time frame that they need to be served.
I think something we did well was really like listening to people both inside and outside government and really starting with the problem. And I think the robust set of pilots were a result of that, like really trying to get at the problem. The housing ambassadors, I definitely would not categorize as a silver bullet solution, right? This is a hard solution, but that was a meaningful one. And I think especially as AI is just a part of all of these conversations, so easy to see it as a silver bullet. And one of the things that there's a stat going around that like 80 to 90% of AI pilots never move beyond the pilot stage. And I think that one of the reasons is like starting with the solution is never, really. So continuing to anchor in the problem, being really optimistic and, about the solutions we're coming up with. I think the thing I would probably do differently is think about the unintended consequences of the solutions that you're putting forward. And I think it's just like as folks who work in this space want to be really, really optimistic, but I think understanding like what are all the things that could go wrong? How could this not land? And then designing for that is really, really important. One of the things that stood out to me from an evaluation that was done after the initial, very early stage was just that people were understanding that they were not going to be eligible sooner, which is really good. Like that's transparency, that's really important. But it was also very discouraging. And so what next? Someone finds out sooner that they're not eligible, then what happens? And so just kind of like thinking expansively about all of the unintended consequences so that that's even more inspiration for additional solutions that might be needed.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for those reflections. I have so many thoughts that I would love to pitch in as follow-up, but I also want to make sure we have a little bit of time for any questions from the audience. So I will ask Shanti to come back and join us, I think, to provide some of those questions.
Hello, everyone. Here I am back again. We do have some audience questions, so let me share. I think we'll have time for a couple of them. One question, or I'm going to combine a few questions into one big question that focuses on maybe the program, how the program works, and how you would like to see the program continue to evolve, and then another question that has to do about like process of how we do this type of work. So let me start with the question about the Housing Ambassador program. And maybe Emily, you can start here. I think people are curious about like what motivates CBOs to be involved in this program, like what motivates them, what keeps them involved, what are incentives, and then are there things that frustrate CBOs? Are there folks who leave the program if there are things that you're able or interested in sharing about that? Maybe in the spirit of what are your hopes and dreams as the program continues to evolve? Could you talk a bit about those things?
Sure. One of the big reasons I remember HPD wanting to take on the ambassador program pilot, and maybe some of the other pilots too, when the PPL fellows brought to us a whole slew of field research on people accessing our services, was that community-based organizations were providing this information to constituents, residents anyway. They just didn't know if it was right. They weren't all providing the same information, wasn't necessarily in a user-friendly format, or they didn't necessarily trust it, but they were doing their best. And so it felt like such an obvious, on the one hand, I talked about how we had to get comfortable with trusting them as actual ambassadors of city information. But if they're going to be doing this anyway, telling people how to qualify for an apartment, then the least we could do is help give them the right information, right? And give them the right information going along with more trainings and access to us if there's a problem, so that we are doing what in the most bureaucratic sense. So we're controlling as much of the information that's out there as we can, but also so that we're just like actually making their services better and serving people better. So that's one piece. And then the second piece, the frustrations.
Yeah, or if there are limitations that folks have experience and how you would like to evolve.
We have had, so there's a huge demand from organizations. What incentivizes them is wanting to serve their communities better and somewhat have access to HPD to be able to pick up the phone and say like, this was unfair, this is a problem. But really it's people are doing community events, education anyway. And so they should have access to the best information and tools and to the city as possible. We have a little bit of funding that we provide. We should be able to provide a lot more. We should ideally be able to provide a lot more because there's such a high demand for ambassador services. So that kind of ties into, we've been successful in different ways and less successful in others, and continue to seek more funding to be able to staff up and expand the number of people that an organization can serve in this particular way, or the number of events they can do. That's an ongoing project. When we've had housing ambassador organizations sign up, get trained, hang around for a while, and then be overwhelmed by the demand and not be able to handle it with the staff that they have in their neighborhood office, or the limited funding that we have been able to provide isn't sufficient to to fully bolster them. So it's not a ton, but it certainly has happened, and we are sympathetic and use it to try to get more funding in the future.
Great. Thank you for digging deeper into that. And then I want to end with a question from Michelle. Michelle asked, how do you create alignment when collaborating with a wide range of stakeholders? So that could include community groups, government agencies, New Yorkers, and frontline staff. Thoughts on that?
I think you need to get everybody in a room. Number one, don't expect full alignment, but number two, get everybody in a room in person if you can. So we started having trainings and feedback sessions with community-based organizations and extending to like applicants, constituents a bit before the pandemic. And then everything went to this format during the pandemic, and we sort of are back to a hybrid the way that we conduct trainings and feedback sessions is hybrid, sometimes in person, sometimes virtual, but the in-person tone, the quality of the conversation, the networking and personal connections that everybody's making among each other are a lot better. And so building in, getting people in a room, and maybe more than once. So giving an opportunity for people to share where they're not aligned, share their perspectives, and then another opportunity a few months later to come back and to see each other again, to talk about what we've learned, to make further connections, is the best way. But not everybody's going to align. And sometimes I have to remind myself that my answer is I want to say yes to you and I want to agree with everyone, but I can't. And so validating that people's concerns or questions, even when not aligned, is key. It's okay if we're not all at perfect alignment.
A quick cap to that is a beautiful description, Emily. I think getting shared understanding about all of the perspectives on the table and making sure there's clarity and shared understanding before you even try to get to any kind of agreement, I think can be really powerful in any kind of stakeholder group. And I think creative solutions come out of tension. And so we can't get to creative solutions without understanding where those points of tension are. So not to be scared of that.
Great. Thank you, both of you, and you, Andrew, for facilitating. I think we are right on time. So with that, am going to wrap us up. Thank you, to all three of you for the conversation today. I really appreciate the reflections on the project, and also, looking back and also thinking about how do we move forward. And I was really struck by this idea that, yeah, like when things are complicated, like it is some kind of instinct in all of us to be like, where is a human who can help me? I sometimes you have to wait on hold for a while, but you still are like, where is the human here in this phone tree? Zero, zero, zero. Get me there. So I really appreciate the conversation and you sharing your time with us today. And as a quick wrap up, just want to remind everyone that this conversation is part of the PPL15 series. We are going to be doing events like this all year long, so please join us. Next month, we're going to be focusing on how we intentionally conduct our work with an eye towards power and ethics, so in our practices. So if you want to stay tuned for that, and I hope you do, please make sure that you're signed up for our newsletter. We announce these types of events and also share our blog posts there, and also over on LinkedIn. So make sure you're following Public Policy Lab there. And we hope to see you at an event very soon. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and goodbye until next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all.